I'm 33, the founder of a small software consultancy that builds boring tools that make unglamorous companies a lot of money. My bank app says I'm fine, my fridge has food that no one will count, and the lights in my apartment turn on without anyone sighing first. I'm writing this from a desk I bought with my own card, and no one's going to tell me to be grateful. I say that not to flex, but because for most of my life, even existing felt like running a tab. My parents taught me two lessons early. Love is a loan, and I came into this world already in arrears. Some households have baby books. Ours had a ledger. It wasn't an actual spiral notebook at first. It started as a phrase, ambient and ever-present. You owe us, my mom would say when I left the toothpaste cap off. For the roof over your head. My dad added interest. You think food is free? You think the heat pays for itself? The bills on the counter were Exhibit A, always fanned out so I could see the red ink. Look, gas, electric. Your bath was 45 minutes. He said bath, like he was reading a charge from a credit card statement. When I was 8, they made it literal. Mom taped a jar to the fridge with a handwritten label, the bill jar. Anytime I cost them extra, spilling milk, growing out of shoes too fast, getting sick, they dropped coins and IOUs into it theatrically. This is just so you remember, she said. So when you're older, you can pay us back. We're not asking for much. Just respect. Respect to them meant obedience and silence. It also meant doing my own laundry because detergent had a price per scoop, and hearing the price per scoop recited like scripture. Birthdays came with receipts. On my 10th, I unwrapped a bike, used, with squeaky brakes. I smiled because I actually wanted it. Dad handed me an envelope. I thought it was a card. It was a photocopy of the Craigslist listing with the price circled. So you know, he said, don't act like this fell from the sky. The card did arrive later. Inside, in my mom's curly handwriting, to many more years. Please remember every gift has a cost. She included a quotation mark around gift, like she wanted to rewrite the dictionary. That was the running joke, except it wasn't a joke. Dinner time was itemized. Don't take seconds. That's my lunch tomorrow, Dad said. When I cut my finger cooking and used too many Band-Aids, Mom said, maybe next time don't bleed so expensive. After school activities? If you want to play soccer, you can pay the fee out of your birthday money, Mom said. Or volunteer at the church bake sale to offset the cost. So I ran laps and iced shins with the sound of a cash register in my head. I learned not to ask. Needs became theft. The first time I needed glasses, I wore my mom down by squinting at the board until she got a call from my teacher. He's struggling, Mrs. Leary said from the kitchen phone. Mom covered the receiver and asked me, you swear you're not lying to get name-brand frames? At the optometrist, while I tried on a pair that didn't slip, she whispered, maybe ruin your vision a little less, and this wouldn't happen. On the way home, Dad folded the receipt into my palm like a tip and said, that one's on the tab. They didn't hit me. Not with fists. They hit me with the math of my existence. A new backpack became proof I was a burden. Heating in winter became a personal failing. In their theology, parents were loan officers and kids were credit risks. When I got the flu, Mom stood at my door with a calculator. Tylenol, tissues, lost wages, she said, thumbs tapping. Do you think we're made of money? I threw up into a mixing bowl and apologized for the brand of cereal that came up. There were other kids at school with mean parents, but their meanness had edges I could see. Mine was a fog of invoices. It made me small. It made me careful. I refused extra cheese on cafeteria pizza because I knew what extra meant. I learned to wash dishes in silence and fold my own shame into quarters like clean towels. And the debt jar followed us everywhere. At the grocery store, if I grabbed fruit snacks, Mom said, put it back. That's how they get you. Meaning the they that manufacture hunger and debt and orange dye. If I had been a different kid, maybe I would have rebelled. I was the kind who made charts instead. I kept private tallies too, but they were of moments. The time Dad said, you'll make it all worthwhile when we're old and you can pay us back, hand on my shoulder like a benediction. The time Mom suggested I write an essay about gratitude for school assembly. I did. She read it and circled lines in red pen. More numbers, she wrote. People respect numbers. I wrote, light bill, $83, 12, copays, $20, property tax, and got a certificate for most thoughtful. I put it in a drawer with the dentist stickers I never felt I earned. I didn't see it as abuse because it was water and I was the fish. I thought I was lucky they had a plan for me. I thought all families spoke fluently in debt. It wasn't until I slept over at my friend Leo's house that I heard a different language. His mom made pancakes on a Saturday, and when I said, "Can I pay you back when I'm older?" she laughed so hard she had to sit down. "Sweetheart," she said, "you pay me back by eating them hot." She pressed a second pancake on my plate like it was free. I didn't know what to do with my hands. When I got home with that smell in my hair, Mom sniffed and said, "So they have money to burn over there?" She went to the fridge, tapped the jar, and said, "Just a reminder." She didn't have to finish. I already knew the rest. Someday, somehow, I would settle up. It took 20 years to understand that was the point. They didn't want love. They wanted a ledger with my name in the red, forever. There was even a chore chart with late fees. If I forgot to take the trash out on Tuesday night, Dad would drag the can back from the curb, set it next to me, and say, "Missed pickup. That's a $10 service charge." If I protested that I didn't have $10, he'd smile like a bank officer and say, "That's fine. It accrues." I was 12 and learned the word accrues the way other kids learn baseball. I wrote it on my hand so I wouldn't forget the spelling. It felt important, like I was being admitted into the secret club of adulthood. Turns out, the membership dues were me. Some nights, lying in bed, I would trace cracks in the ceiling and imagine my account balance in their heads. It glowed red, bottomless. I made vows to the darkness like a kid prays. When I'm old enough, I'll get a job. I'll pay them back. I'll make the number 0 so quiet it stops ringing in my ears. I didn't know that there are other numbers, the kind that count breath in quiet mornings. I didn't know you can choose who gets to keep your score. I only knew that someday I'd be tall enough to reach the jar, untape it, and dump it out on the counter. I didn't know I'd replace it with my own memo that would taste like pancakes the first time I read it. I moved out the week I turned 18 with 2 duffel bags, a borrowed air mattress, and the kind of optimism you pack because it doesn't weigh anything. The apartment was technically a basement, technically garden level, practically damp. The landlord handed me keys and a photocopy of the building rules and said, "No parties." I said, "You'll be safe with me." I bought a roll of quarters like a talisman and learned the laundry hours by heart. My first job was dishwashing at a diner where the grease didn't always come off, no matter how hot the water. The manager liked to say, "We're a family here," meaning we gave away our breaks when it got busy and covered shifts when the cook didn't show. Family meant scraping plates with a butter knife until my wrists buzzed. After the late shift, I'd walk home past the pawn shop that sold guitars I never touched because even looking felt expensive. I counted my steps out loud. Rent, groceries, books, bus pass, ramen. Ramen again. Community college was my way out, though I didn't know what out meant yet. I took morning classes so I could make the lunch rush, then closed at night. I did my homework on milk crates behind the diner, the pages spotted with grease like a watermark. I liked math because it behaved. X showed up when you treated it right. English was harder, too many variables. But I learned to write clean in the margins of a life that wasn't. The call started slowly, like a faucet drip. "Hey stranger," Mom would say, bright with effort. "Just checking in." She didn't ask how I was. She asked how much I was making. "We were talking about you last night," she'd say. "About all the sacrifices we made." Dad would come on the line like a judge entering chambers. "Remember the orthodontist?" he'd say. "For $1,000. That's not imaginary." He had a way of making the word imaginary sound childish. "We're not asking for the world. Maybe you could send something to show goodwill. A token. So we know you're serious about being an adult." I sent it. Of course I did. $100 looked small on paper and huge in my wallet. I wrote "token" on the memo line like it would remind me who I was paying and why. That first month I was late on my electric bill because I was early on theirs. When I told Mom, she laughed. "Welcome to the real world," she said. "We all juggle." Then she texted me a photo of the bill jar, now kept in a kitchen drawer. "We kept it," she wrote. So sentimental. I stared at the picture until the angle of the light showed dust under the lip and wondered how long it had been waiting for me. The first time I said no, I didn't mean to. I'd just gotten off a double when Mom called and asked for a bonus payment because your father's back is out and we bought a new mattress. I said, "I can't this month." The silence on the line had a shape. It was the shape of being 8 years old and watching the jar fill. "Wow," she said finally. "So much for family." I wanted to tell her families don't invoice. Instead, I apologized 3 times and sent 50 anyway. I ate rice with salt and lemon juice the rest of the week and told myself it was a choice. By 21, I transferred to a state university with a scholarship that covered tuition if I kept a certain GPA. My apartment had windows you could sit in and a radiator that hissed like an old man telling a story. I took a class called Data Structures and another called Ethics, which felt like A and slash, but in my schedule. In the ethics class, we read about moral debts and social contracts. The professor said, when an obligation is coerced, it ceases to be a gift and becomes a transaction. I wrote, in all caps, transactions are not love, and underlined it until the page fluffed up. I interned at a small logistics software company my junior year. I was the invisible person who made spreadsheets behave and coffees appear. I watched the engineers talk about debt in code, the kind you pay down with good decisions. My boss, Mira, said, we carry the debt that matters, and we pay it forward, not back. She was the first adult who said I was good at something without adding, for a kid like you. When she wrote me a reference letter that actually used my name more than once, I cried in a library bathroom and then pretended it was allergies. Home kept calling. We're proud, Mom would say, and then, we were remembering your hospital stay when you were 2. The deductible was brutal. Dad upgraded from texts to spreadsheets. He sent me one titled Our Investment and color-coded categories: food, shelter, health, education, miscellaneous. He put interest rates next to them like the categories were certificates of deposit. In the comments column, he wrote, we're not greedy, we're just practical. I didn't respond for 3 days, which somehow felt louder than anything I could say. The summer before senior year, I had 3 jobs: the internship, the warehouse, and temping at an office that smelled like toner. I slept like you do on airplanes, mouth open, dreams thin. I stopped sending the 100 and started sending 50 because 50 could be the difference between groceries and not. Mom texted back, noted. Dad added a new column to the spreadsheet, shortfall. At the bottom, in a little bold box, he wrote, balance forwarded. I looked at the bold box and felt something I didn't have words for then. Now I know the word. Anger. Not the hot kind that makes you punch walls. The cold kind that makes you a scientist. I started saving everything. Pay stubs, tuition letters, every receipt that belonged to me. I started an account called Quiet. I put $5 in sometimes none. I wrote for pancakes on a sticky note and stuck it on the inside of my closet where only I could see. Graduation came like a bar closing, all at once and too slow. I wore a borrowed gown and a mortarboard someone had sharpened a meme on last year. My parents didn't come. Mom said, we can't afford the gas. Dad said, stream it. You know we're not about ceremonies. I sat with Leo's family and let his mom fold me into pictures like a nephew. When they took us to dinner afterward and the check came, she put a hand on it and said, don't even think about it. I didn't. I just let the feeling move through me like heat. A week later, Dad wrote, now that you're gainfully employed, I wasn't yet. We should talk schedule. Not trying to be a burden. The irony made me laugh so hard I scared a pigeon. I didn't answer. I walked to the public library instead and sat in the quiet under a fan that ticked. I opened my new laptop, a graduation gift from Myra's company that came with a card signed by everyone in blue ink, and I started a spreadsheet. At the top, I wrote, what they say IOWE. Under that, I wrote, what I choose. My first real job out of college paid $58,000 and felt like winning a game I didn't know the rules for. The HR rep slid me a packet and said something about 401k. And I nodded like I understood. I bought a couch from a thrift store that didn't smell like anyone else and a set of plates that all matched. When I set them in a cabinet, the clink sounded like a bell rung for me. The company did routing software for trucking companies, which is a romance novel if you love edges and efficiency. I loved it. My desk plant survived. I survived. I wrote code and documentation and little scripts that made other people's jobs easier. My boss, Mira, kept giving me problems that were slightly too big for me, and then backing away like she trusted I'd find out how to carry them. Sometimes I did not, but the falling didn't feel like failure. It felt like learning how to land on my feet. Money stopped being a siren or a scold and became a tool. I put what I could in the 401k. I learned about an emergency fund and built mine in increments of don't panic. I bought groceries without rehearsing the total in my head first. I stopped sending money home. That last part took longer than the others. It wasn't a big speech. It was a series of not texts. Mom called, left a cheerful voicemail about recalibrating expectations. Dad sent the spreadsheet again with new formulas that shouted when you opened the file. I let it sit. I kept them unblocked, then. I'm not a monster. I answered sometimes. I told myself boundaries were a kind of repayment, too. When they asked if I could chip in for Christmas, I said, I'm saving for something, which was true and also a convenient fog. The something was a future where my life wasn't accounted for by other people. Mira left to start her own consultancy and a year later called me and said, do you want to be bored and well paid with me? I did. We worked out of a co-working space that had infinite coffee and infinite red marker fumes. Our first client paid us late. Our second paid us too much because they thought our rate was per hour instead of per day and then shrugged and said, keep it. I learned how to invoice and how to ask, can we put that in writing, without sounding like I thought you might steal from me. We weren't fancy, but we shipped. Shipping pays bills. 3 years in, we hired our first employee, a guy named Braden who wore hats that made sense on him. I paid a payroll service to do the math I didn't want to do wrong. I picked health plans and colored Gantt charts and scheduled dentist appointments without asking for permission. I walked past the pawn shop one night and noticed the guitars looked dusty and my throat closed around the memory of wanting one. So I bought a secondhand acoustic that rang honest, and I learned 4 chords slowly. The first thing I played sounded like relief. I kept waiting for my parents to be proud in a way that didn't ask for anything. They weren't. Pride came with a comma. Proud of you. Now that you're stable, maybe you can help us redo the kitchen. Proud of you. Since you're a big shot now, we could really use a new water heater. Sometimes they skipped the comma and went straight to the ask like it was implied in the definition of pride. I said no more often. Not perfectly. More often. They started guilt mining the past again. Not asking for the world, Dad would write, then list the world in bullet points. Mom sent long texts about how families support each other, with anecdotes about cousins I barely knew paying for their parents' vacations. Isn't it nice? She'd conclude. It wasn't nice. It was a story they liked because it kept their ledger alive. The days I didn't answer, I slept better. Leo got married in a park in June and I stood beside him holding a ring that fit like a small, perfect circle. His mom squeezed my arm and said, you're coming over next Sunday. No arguments. I went and ate too many deviled eggs and listened to his dad's stories about engine parts and let the sound of people who liked each other fill my pockets. On the way home, I realized I'd stopped bracing before walking into a room. My shoulders had started to forget the weight. Around that time, I started therapy. The therapist had plants that looked well and a clock that ticked in a friendly way. I told her I was there because I had trouble saying no like it was an affliction. We talked about childhood. I brought up the bill jar, and she actually said, Jesus. She taught me phrases like, that doesn't work for me, and I'm not available for that, and we can reconnect another time. Someone once told me resilience is doing the same amount of life with less pain. Therapy gave me a way to do the same amount of life and feel like it belonged to me. 2 years later, I bought the apartment I used to rent. The landlord retired and offered it to me before listing it because I always fixed my own sink and paid rent on the first. I call it buying. The bank would like a word. Either way, the keys felt heavier in my hand in a good way. I painted the bedroom the color of rain at noon. I added shelves. I put my patched backpack from high school on the top shelf of the closet, and for the first time, it looked small instead of like a flag I had to climb. The calls from home kept coming, but their tone shifted. They wanted money with less preamble. They forwarded me a GoFundMe they started for household modernization, with a goal of $10,000 and exactly one donor, my aunt, $20. If we post this, it'll be embarrassing, Mom wrote. It would be solved so quickly if you would be the hero. I closed the tab and went to a meeting and built a dashboard for a client that showed them, in real time, how much fuel their trucks were using when drivers left the AC on at stops. Numbers can tell the truth and still be used to lie. I was getting good at telling which was which. That day, the word hero wouldn't leave me alone. It sounded sticky like bait. I took the long way home and ended up at the library, because libraries are where I go when I want to be the kind of person who believes in public things. I sat in the cool and wrote a list. Things I owe that are mine to owe: taxes, employees, rent, kindness. Things I don't: their vacations, their cabinets, their pride. I put the notebook away. It felt like locking a door from the inside. I wish I could say the decision to go no contact happened then. It didn't. I carried the phone around like a small storm. I answered sometimes. I felt sick sometimes. But the chord progression in my chest was changing. Instead of the old minor key of fear, there were steadier notes. Work, friends, a plant I kept alive, a body that started to feel like a house I wanted to live in. Independence wasn't fireworks. It was filing quarterly taxes on time and sleeping through the night like a person. It was woking noodles in my own pan and not counting the drops of oil. When I tell people now that I'm self-made, I know that's a lie. I'm community-made. I am Myra's wannabe bored and well-paid, Leo's loner sweatshirt, Franklin's take a minute, the library fan ticking when the air was thick. My parents taught me plenty, too. I learned compound interest from them, how harm grows when you feed it, how fear reinvests itself. Independence, for me, was buying one share of my own life at a time until I realized I had a controlling interest. I still had the spreadsheet I started in the library the week after graduation. I hadn't filled it in beyond the header. One night, after another text from Dad that read, "Just following up on outstanding items," I opened it again. The cursor blinked at me like an eye. I typed, food, shelter, healthcare, clothing, education, MISC, year. Then, under that, in bold, market rates. Under that, adjusted for inflation. I saved the file as pancakes. XLSX, and closed the laptop with a click that sounded like a promise. The night, I named the spreadsheet Pancakes. XLSX, I didn't know it would become a blueprint. I just liked the joke, sweetness laid over math. But I kept opening it, adding columns, tabs, little notes to myself in cells like breadcrumbs. On one tab, I wrote assumptions. On another, sources. I know that sounds like overkill for a revenge plan. But if you're going to give people exactly what they asked for, you have to be so precise there's no oxygen left for argument. I started with the easy stuff, rent. They lived in a 2-bedroom my whole childhood. I pulled up old listings from the local paper's online archives. Blurry PDFs that looked like they'd been faxed, then sneezed on. Average difference between a 1-bedroom and a 2-bedroom in our town in 2001. About $85 per month. In 2007, $110. I typed the deltas year by year, adjusting for the weird dip in 2009 when the landlord gave everyone a recession discount. In the margin of that row I wrote, only counting the incremental square footage, not paying for your porch swing. Then I added a column called CPI, because one of the first things you learn running a business is that yesterday's dollars have today's headaches. I pulled consumer price index data and built a function to bring each year forward to current dollars. I kept notes on everything, like 2003 rent diff equals $90 asterisk 12 equals $1,080. CPI adjust factor dash 1, 64, total equals $1,771. 20. I made myself show the sense. Petty? Maybe. Meticulous? Definitely. Food next. Mom loved to tell the story about me supposedly eating like a grown man at 10. I looked up the thrifty food plan for a male child by age bracket for those years and put it in. I subtracted the free lunch months I remembered. There was a whole school year where I used a little punch card and pretended it was cool. I rounded up on the months I wasn't sure about. I added a footnote. Assume 60% of household grocery increase attributable to me, conservative. I listed out. 2002. Age 10, $142. 60/MO asterisk 12 equals $1,711. 20. Adjust factor 1. 72 equals $2,949. 26. The numbers got dull and then, weirdly, comforting. They were just bricks. Lay enough of them and you get a wall. Healthcare. The monster under the bed. Dad's favorite line item. Remember the orthodontist? I do, because I remember the rubber band snapping during math class. I found the actual invoice in a stack of papers I had rescued from their garage the summer before college. $4, $200 paid over a payment plan. I entered $4,200. I found the ER copay when I broke my wrist falling off Leo's skateboard, $150. I entered $150. Glasses, 2 pairs, $89 each at the chain place that sold frames with names like the Maverick. Vaccines? I left those out because the county clinic did them free on Saturdays, which I know because Mom made a point of saying, see, not everything costs. Pediatrician copays. I guessed based on the receipts I had, $20 here, $30 there. I wrote, estimate, in bright yellow, and then, because I could hear Dad saying, convenient, I added 15% assuming I was low. The total sat there a minute, then I breathed again. Clothing and school stuff I treated like the boring middle of the sandwich. Back-to-school sneakers from the discount place at the strip mall, $35 to $60 a year. Jackets that moved down from cousins, $0, because we both know where those came from. Field trip fees. I could still see the permission slip for the Science Museum with $12 circled and Mom's handwriting. This adds up. I made a column called Trips and filled it with little numbers that felt like paper cuts. Yearbooks? They never bought them. Prom ticket? I used my own money from the diner. I didn't include those. I was building something that could survive cross-examination. Utilities were a fight. How much extra water does a kid use? How much of the electric bill is me? I set the rule. I would only include incremental, not shared. So no split of the whole electric bill. Just the additional consumption you could reasonably tie to a third person. Extra laundry, longer showers, the ancient box fan that whirred all night because I couldn't sleep without noise. I estimated $12 per month across childhood and added a humility factor of plus 10%. I wrote next to it, if you want me to itemize baths for 18 years, I will, but we'll both die of boredom first. I created a credits tab too, which is where I think the plan became more than revenge. It became fair. I listed tax benefits they likely got for having a dependent, the child tax credit in those years, the earned income tax credit when they qualified. They did. I remember the year Mom bragged about a refund like she'd found money in the couch, dependent exemptions. I marked them in negative numbers and dragged them into the total. I subtracted my teenage contributions, busser money handed over, the phone bill I paid when Dad got sick of my texts, the rent token in college. I added simple interest on amounts I knew were loans from me to them because Dad taught me what accrues means, and I decided that lesson gets to live in both directions. If the point is a ledger, then make it a ledger that can hold more than one person's story. I had to get their bank info to send anything significant. I already had it from the years I transferred Goodwill, but I wanted to make sure nothing bounced, no excuses. So I sent Mom a bland text in the middle of a week. Can you confirm your routing/account? I need to send you something this month. Don't want to fat finger it. She replied in 43 seconds with a photo of a check and 3 emojis. Look who's coming through, face blowing a kiss, face blowing a kiss, face blowing a kiss, she wrote. I took the numbers and put them in a sticky labeled weapon. This is the part where I admit I showed it to my therapist. I need a reality check, I said, pushing my laptop across the tiny coffee table toward the fern. She adjusted her glasses, scrolled through the tabs, stopped at the credits sheet, and said, "You're being more generous than most people would be." I wanted her to tell me I was a monster so I could stop. She didn't. "You're building a boundary as an equation," she said. "That makes sense given your history." She looked me in the eyes for longer than felt comfortable. "Are you ready for the part where they tell you the math is wrong because it didn't give them what they really wanted?" I didn't know what to say, so I wrote it down. I spent a few Sundays at the public library getting the decimals right. There were kids at the next table making a Lego city out of primary colors, and my laptop screen glowed with my own small city of cells. I added a sensitivity tab to test what happened if I'd underestimated rent by 10% or food by 15%. The number didn't wiggle much. It just breathed in and out. I took the upper bound total. I added $500 for miscellaneous memory errors, because petty doesn't mean cheap. Then I rounded up to the nearest dollar, and then, because the bill jar always had coins rattling, I added 17, the total of the quarters and dimes I could picture in the bottom. $0. 17 felt like a ghost exhale. The number at the bottom of pancakes. XLSX looked like this. $96,842. 17. Every time I looked at it, it felt both too big and too small. Too big because you shouldn't have to pay anyone to be allowed to leave their story. Too small because childhood is 20 years of weather and expectation, and that can't be priced. But that was the point. They'd named the game. I was just going to play it. One perfect move, then walk away from the table. I printed the summary page because paper feels like ceremony. I put it in a manila folder and wrote, with a Sharpie, settlement. I didn't know yet when I'd send the money. I knew where the button lived. I knew the memo I'd use. I practiced it in a notes app like you rehearse a speech for a wedding. Not to impress, but not to fumble. 16 characters max, the bank said for ACH memos. I tested variations. Obligation closed. Balance 0. Debt repaid. The last one hit the center of the target, old words standing up straight. At home that night, I made pancakes for dinner. I didn't measure the milk carefully. I used too much syrup and licked it off my knuckles and didn't apologize to anyone. I washed the plate and left the dish rack uneven on purpose. Then I sat at my desk, looked at the folder, and spoke out loud to the empty room. You wanted a ledger, I said. Okay. My voice didn't shake. I slept like I'd paid a bill I used to forget existed, the kind that charges you in whispers. I chose a Tuesday because Tuesdays don't have drama built in. Monday is too loud. Friday is too symbolic. Weekends mean you sit with your decisions. Tuesday is just Tuesday. I got up early, did my usual loop around the neighborhood with coffee in a paper cup that went lukewarm too fast, came back and watered the plant by the window. The morning had that gray light that makes everything look honest. Before I wired a life's worth of math, I sanity checked the number one more time. Pancakes. XLSX still sat on my desktop, little battery of tabs like soldiers at attention. The total hadn't moved since Sunday. $96,842. 17. I whispered the cents aloud, because the cents were the point. If you're going to speak in receipts, you need to hit the notes exactly. I logged into my bank. Two-factor authentication pinged my phone. The transfer screen popped up with its familiar bland fields: amount, routing, account, memo. All those months of being a good son, of sending 20s, 50s, hundreds, had left their account pre-saved in a drop-down with my mother's name misspelled the way she'd typed it the first time. I didn't fix it. I selected it. The cursor blinked in the amount box like a metronome. I typed 96842. 17 and stared until the numbers stopped swimming. Memo, debt repaid. I hit continue. The confirmation screen gave me one last chance to be the person who flinches. I didn't. I pressed submit and watched the little progress wheel spin like a clock that didn't care about me either way. Then, transfer scheduled. Estimated arrival, tomorrow, ACH. A confetti animation, insultingly festive, scattered across the screen like a party popper. I laughed. It came out strange. A text arrived 30 seconds later. Mom, you just sent almost $100,000? I hadn't expected them to see it that fast. Maybe her banking app did push notifications brighter than mine. The dots bubbled. Then, what is this supposed to mean? No question mark. Another text from Dad. A screenshot of the bank alert. Then, what's the catch? Then, call me immediately. He followed it with immediately, alone, like a spell. I turned the phone over like it was something that could bite. They called. Of course they called. I let it ring out because there was a script I wanted to avoid at all costs. The one where I'm lured into the courtroom of their voices and made to argue in bad faith. Voicemail. My phone transcribed it live on the lock screen, the words stumbling over each other. Mom. Honey. This is too much. We need to talk. We can't accept. Well, we can accept, but not like this. What are you doing? You can't just call us. Dad's voicemail was cleaner. We're not some charity. You don't buy your way out of respect. Then a second one. This is not how family works. We appreciate the gesture. But, call me. I made breakfast. 2 eggs, toast. I ate standing up. My hands shook a little, so I sat down. I opened my laptop and clicked the folder that said settlement. I looked at the printed summary again, the way a climber might look back at a ledge. I took a pen and underlined the final line where I had written, in plain language, this is the total cost they framed as a debt, calculated conservatively, adjusted to present dollars, and corrected by known credits. The balance is 0. Then I did the small, concrete things that mark endings. I went to my phone. I opened messages, hit the info button on our thread, scrolled to block this caller. My thumb hovered. I thought of Leo's wedding, of Myra's bored and well paid, of being 12 and learning the word accrues like a secret handshake. I pressed block. A pop-up asked if I was sure. I was. I blocked Dad next. Then the family group chat where my aunt posts minion memes and my mother occasionally corners me with, "What are you bringing for Easter?" Like we didn't live 3 states apart. Email next. I set a filter. If sender is mom's address or dad's address or the joint account they share, mark as read. Archive. Send auto response. I typed the auto response 3 different ways before I found the right one. Not cruel. Final. It read, "I have transferred the amount I calculate you spent raising me. In full, adjusted to present dollars. Memo. Debt repaid. We do not have a transactional relationship anymore. Do not contact me." I sent myself a test. It landed in the right folder like a check landing flat on a counter. Then I remembered the social media angles. Facebook where people perform, Instagram where people pretend. I changed settings, removed follows, tightened windows until my face in the mirror looked like someone who had turned off a faucet that had leaked for years. The quiet got big. It spooked me for about 5 minutes. Then it felt like a new room in a house I already owned. Around noon, a number I didn't recognize called. I answered because I used to be a person who always answered. It was my aunt. "Your mother is having a fit," she said without hello. In the background, I heard the cadence of a wail I know the shape of. "She says you sent them some kind of insult?" Auntie is direct. "Is it true?" "It's true," I said. "It's not an insult. It's exactly the opposite of one." "She says you wrote debt repaid, like you're some gangster," my aunt went on. "She says you're cruel. She told me my entire life that I owed them everything." I said, "I paid what I could reasonably calculate. I owe them nothing now. That's the point." There was a pause. The kind where you can hear someone decide to step onto your side or not. "You always were the literal type," she said finally, a little humor in it, a little awe. "They're going to say you're heartless. You know that." "I know," I said. "I'm not." "You're not," she agreed. "Anyway, I wanted to hear it from you." She lowered her voice. "And I'm proud of you. Don't tell your mother I said that." She hung up before I could say thank you, like she'd snuck me a cookie at a family reunion. At 3, my bank pinged me. Transfer completed. The money left my world and entered theirs with a thunk you couldn't hear. I imagine Mom holding her phone like a chalice, Dad pacing like he does when he's rehearsing outrages. I imagine them scrolling through my memo line with a magnifying glass. Debt repaid. I imagine them trying on different tones for saying it out loud. Mocking? Injured? Triumphant? Practice generosity? I thought about what they might do with the money. Redo the kitchen like they'd asked? Buy the water heater? Post it on Facebook like a trophy of parental investment finally returned with interest? Spin it into a story where they are long-suffering saints and I am the checkbook's son? That part wasn't my business anymore. The wire moved money, but the click that mattered was the one that closed the door. At 5, I went to the climbing gym and failed a V4 problem twice, then sent it on the 3rd try because I didn't let my mind wander to their house. I ate noodles and watched a movie with too many car chases. Every so often my hand went to my phone like a reflex and found nothing waiting. The blankness felt like clean sheets. Before bed, I wrote one last thing. Not to them. To myself, in my notes app, which is where I put the sentences I need future me to read. "Love is not a bill," I wrote. "If someone hands you an invoice for being alive, pay it with silence." Then, because silence is a kind of sound, I put on the radio station that plays jazz at night. A trumpet did what it does. I brushed my teeth. I turned off the light. Just before sleep, a small silly thought bobbed up. Somewhere, in a kitchen drawer 1,000 miles away, there's an empty jar with tape residue on its mouth, waiting for coins that aren't coming. The first week after the transfer was a phantom limb week. I kept reaching for the phone to brace for whatever came next and coming up with air. It turns out your nervous system doesn't get the memo right away when a door locks. It paces on the other side for a while, knocking at intervals only it understands. The filter I set worked. Emails slid into the archive with the sound of nothing. I didn't check, at first. Then curiosity knocked like a neighbor. On day 3, I opened the archive and scanned subjects without opening the bodies. "This is not what we meant. Please reconsider. We are humiliated. This is a misunderstanding. We are your parents. What will people say?" I closed the tab. 10 minutes later, I opened it again. I searched for the memo line as if seeing it would steady me. It did. Every auto-response I'd configured lined up like a little row of parking tickets. "We do not have a transactional relationship anymore. Do not contact me." They escalated like I knew they would. A Facebook post surfaced via a cousin's screenshot. A long, self-pitying paragraph about kids these days and cold hard money, and raised him with love, and look what we get. I didn't read it twice. I didn't read the comments at all. Leo texted, "Want me to report it?" I said, "No, let them curate their museum." Then I put my phone face down and fixed a leaky cabinet hinge because the hinge was fixable. A letter arrived in handwriting that made my stomach remember third grade. The envelope had 3 stamps like the weight of its righteousness demanded extra postage. I stood in my kitchen holding it while the kettle boiled and decided not to open it. I wrote "Return to Sender" in block letters, walked it back down the hall, and put it in the outgoing slot. The decision felt like a muscle I didn't know I had finally doing a job it was built for. Therapy helped name what was happening. "Extinction burst," she said, drawing a wave with her finger in the air. When a pattern that used to get them what they wanted stops working, they push harder before it dies. I said, "So I just wait?" She smiled. "You live?" The simplicity of it lodged somewhere good. Living looked ordinary and expensive in time, the way all good things are. We signed a bigger client at the consultancy, and Braden and I high-fived in a way that made the plant by the window tremble. I moved our stand-up to 9 because my mornings had been swallowed by doom scrolling, and I needed a reason to leave the apartment on time. I started running again, even though I'm not built like a runner. My legs gave me back little planks of wood each time, and at the end of the week I had enough to build a small dock in my head where the water was still. "Any updates?" Mira asked one afternoon when we were eating banh mi on the curb because the tables were taken. I told her about the letter I didn't open. She nodded like a coach watching good form. "You'll be tempted to explain," she said. "Don't." We chewed for a while. She said, "The work is not the spreadsheet. The work is enduring the silence you asked for." Coming from someone who can talk all day about systems, it landed. A small practical thing. I called a lawyer and paid him to draft a simple letter stating I did not consent to being contacted by my parents and asking that any attempts be directed to his office. He advised me on a few specifics. Send it certified, keep receipts, document any in-person contact. "You don't need it unless you need it," he said. The professionalism of it soothed the parts of me still expecting a rules check. Also, it was a delight to write my counsel in an email and have it be true. They tried the back door. An email came to the company info address with my full name in the subject and a tone I know too well. "We want to reach our son. Please pass along." Braden, who checks the inbox, slacked me with a screenshot and 3 question marks. "Family," I said. No action. He reacted with a heart and went back to a bug about date parsing, which is love if you speak our dialect. My aunt called again from a different number, which I answered on reflex. "Your mother says you blocked her." She opened, like she was reading a weather report. "She says you threw money at her and ran." I sat on my stoop. The concrete was warm. "I didn't run," I said. "I moved my life in a direction she doesn't get to steer." She exhaled a laugh that wasn't unkind. "Semantics," she said. Then, for what it's worth, the kitchen still looks like a before picture, and they put the money into a new truck for your father. He wanted something that felt like a win. They are calling it a blessing. I pictured Dad with a new key fob and an old story. "Good for them," I said, and meant it. "You don't feel guilty?" she prodded, curious, not accusing. I looked at the street trees, the way the wind made the leaves argue gently. "I still feel trained," I said. "But that's different." Small celebrations. I took myself to the diner where I used to scrub plates and sat at the counter. The waitress with the silver hair, who has watched me become a long series of selves, put down a plate without me ordering. "Pancakes. On me," she said, hand already up to wave away protest. "Don't argue." I didn't. The pancakes were the thick kind, with edges that crisped slightly and butter that made a lake. A kid 2 stools over stared with cartoon eyes. I cut a quarter of my stack and slid it onto his plate. His dad pretended to be scandalized. We all laughed. The bill came and the waitress had written, "So proud of you, kiddo," where the total goes. I tipped like someone who could. At home, I took the manila folder labeled settlement down from the shelf and opened it. The printed summary looked less like homework now and more like a certificate. I put it back. I didn't need to look at it again for a while. I didn't delete pancakes. XLSX either. I set it to read only and moved it into a folder called closed. The point wasn't to erase evidence. The point was to stop living inside it. Sleep got weird before it got better. I had dreams where I was back in the kitchen, the bill jar taped to the fridge, but when I reached for it, my hand went through the glass like it was water. I'd wake with my heart doing that rabbit thing. I started doing those breathing exercises my therapist likes, the ones that make you feel silly until your body says, oh, right, and cooperates. The dreams backed off to weekly, then every few weeks. One morning I realized I hadn't had one in a month, and I made pancakes to market. Not because anyone asked me to, but because rituals are how we tell ourselves the truth. There were moments I did want to call. A holiday rolled around and Leo's family text thread filled with photos of pies and a dog in a sweater, and I felt a hollow space where our family group chat used to sit like a tooth you keep tonguing after it's gone. I called Leo instead and asked if I could come by for an hour. You can come by for 6, he said. His mom sent me home with leftovers in old Tupperware and a stern warning to return the containers or she'd fight me in the street. I left them on my counter too long on purpose. It was like permission to be careless. Work grew. We hired a designer who laughs like a snack bag being crumpled and makes everything we do look more expensive than it is. We landed a retainer with a shipping company whose CTO wears socks with planets on them. On Fridays, I started ordering breakfast for the team. Eggs, bagels, fruit. Always an extra pancake order no one claimed, but that always disappeared. At some point, I stopped flinching when the electric bill auto-drafted. The lights in the office were just lights. Sometimes I left them on by accident, and the world didn't send me a fine. A practical thing changed, too. I updated my will and medical directives. I named Leo my emergency contact. You sure? He said, mock serious. I'm very irresponsible under pressure. You're the most responsible person I know, I said. You once returned a shopping cart in a blizzard. He shrugged. I like a tidy parking lot. It felt bigger than paperwork. It felt like drawing a map in case of weather. One evening, as summer slid into the kind of fall that smells like pencils, I walked past a yard sale. A jar sat on a card table, not a mason jar, but a weird, old-fashioned thing with a metal clasp. I bought it for $1. At home, I washed it, dried it, put 3 coins in, 2 quarters and a dime, shook it once, listened to the sound, then took the lid off and poured them back into my hand. I carried the jar to the chute room and set it gently on top of the recycling bin. Someone else can use it to collect beach glass or screws. I'm done with jars. The last attempt came at 9 on a Tuesday night, months later. A knock on my door that sounded like my father's patience. I froze. I looked through the peephole. It wasn't them. It was a delivery guy with a bouquet in a cellophane cone and a note peeking out. I cracked the door on the chain. For? I asked. He read the tag. My name. Sender, blank. I signed because the delivery guy was just trying to be done. I set the flowers on the counter and opened the note with exactly the level of ceremony it deserved, which is to say none. Inside, we forgive you. Love, Mom and Dad. No return address. I took the flowers to the stoop. A neighbor was coming in, earbuds in, a kind face. Want these? I asked. She lit up. Seriously? My girlfriend's birthday. Seriously, I said. She took them like a relay baton. I went back upstairs and washed my hands. Forgiveness is another form of control if you didn't ask for it. After that, nothing. The quiet settled into its own furniture. I developed new reflexes. A hand that reaches for the dimmer switch because I like the evening soft. A calendar where I pencil and rest like a meeting with someone important. Sometimes I think of my parents driving their new truck, the little chime when the doors open, the way Dad probably taps the steering wheel to the radio like he always did. I hope the heater works in winter. I hope the tires hold. That hope is mine. It doesn't cost me anything. If you're reading this to find out whether they apologized, they didn't. If you're reading to see if the money fixed the past, it didn't. It wasn't for that. It was a receipt filed in the correct drawer. The fix was in choosing a different language going forward. Some days I speak it clumsily. Most days I get the verbs right. No. Enough. Mine. Home. I used to think closure was a door slamming. Now I know it's a door that stays closed, and you stop checking the lock. The first time I went a whole day without thinking about them. I didn't notice until I was brushing my teeth at midnight and realized the tape loop in my head had gone quiet. In the silence, other noises came forward. My upstairs neighbor laughing at a sitcom, the radiator ticking, my own breath doing its sturdy, unspectacular job. It felt like being trusted by your own body again. There's a story my parents told, and a story I tell. There's Children are debts that come due. Parents are creditors who can decide on the terms. Love is collateral. Respect is a payment plan. Mine. Now, children are not debts. Parenting is not a loan. Love is a gift, or it is accounting. If someone insists on a receipt for your existence, you can decide whether to keep shopping there. Writing pancakes. XLSX was the most on-brand thing I've ever done, and sometimes I roll my eyes at myself for it. But I needed that bridge, a structure to carry me from I-O to I am. It would be tidy to say I deleted it ceremonially and ate a pancake over the recycling bin while monks chanted. I didn't. It's in the closed folder. When I stumble on it searching for something else, I feel a small, clean pride. Not because of the number, because I built a way out using the language I was taught. Then I stopped speaking that language when I crossed the border. People ask me, sometimes in DMs and sometimes with that careful voice friends use when they don't want to step on a bruise, whether I'll ever reconnect. As if the connection was cut by accident, like a wire we might splice if we just find the ends. Here's the cleanest answer I have. If they ever show up without an invoice. If they ever acknowledge the ledger itself was the harm, not the amounts written there. If they come not with "we forgive you," or "we accept," or "we're ready to negotiate," but with "we did something that taught you to value yourself as a line item, and we're sorry," I will consider what closeness could be. The odds of that are lottery-ish. I don't buy tickets. My life doesn't require their apology to be real. I did change one thing that mattered to a kid I used to be. I set up a recurring donation to the school district's lunch debt fund in my hometown. It's not a halo. It's an algorithm to tip the scale a hair. The amount. This is petty and perfect. The sum of the credits tab from my spreadsheet, divided monthly. Not because I owe, but because I understand what it felt like to eat and wonder who's counting. Once a quarter I add, and a pancake breakfast, to the envelope I send to the community center where Leo and I used to play basketball under flickering lights. I don't put my name on anything. I put, "for hot food while it's still hot." I'm not trying to fix the world. I'm trying to hold the part of it I can carry. Success tastes less like champagne and more like a good chair. I sit in mine to do boring, honest work that keeps other people's trucks on the right roads. My mornings start with a list. My evenings end with a book more often than not. I can afford to replace my pots and pans, but I keep the old skillet I bought when I was 20 because it remembers every breakfast I learned to make for myself. The other day, I noticed its handle is finally loose, and I smiled and fixed it with a screwdriver I own because I like owning tools that make other things stay together. I've made some rules for future me, agreements, really. I wrote them on an index card and taped it inside the cabinet where I keep flour and sugar because those are the house gods that have never failed me. No conversations where the premise is I must justify my existence. No financial entanglements with people who treat help as a promissory note. If I am tempted to buy forgiveness, I will buy flowers for a neighbor instead. Pancakes on Sundays if there's nothing else to celebrate. Celebrating nothing is a good use of time. When the holidays come, I plan them with the people who showed up without invoices. The team, Leo and his family, my neighbor with the earbuds, the waitress who hands me pancakes unasked. Family is an action. It is carrying folding chairs to the church basement for the potluck and refilling the water pitchers and taking home leftovers in threatening Tupperware. It is text chains that don't weaponize birthdays. It is loans that are actually gifts because the return currency is a photo of your friend's kid holding a turtle, not a spreadsheet with a shortfall column. I don't recommend revenge as a lifestyle. It's a single-use tool, but there is a particular kind that isn't fire or gossip or scorched earth. It's symmetry. It's returning the logic that was used against you in a perfect rectangle of its own making and then stepping back while it collapses under its weight. I didn't give them extra. I didn't beg. I didn't send paragraphs about philosophy. I sent a number they could understand with a memo they'd recognize. Then I blocked the channel where they harvest reactions and planted something else. Some nights I still find myself counting steps to the subway, seconds until the kettle whistles, pennies in my jacket pocket after a laundromat run. Counting feels safer than not. When I catch myself tallying my worth, I do a stupid little trick I learned in therapy. I name 5 things in the room that cost nothing. Light across the floorboards. The sound my neighbor's dog makes when it dreams. The look on Braden's face when a CSS bug finally makes sense. The draft of air that sneaks in under the door in winter. The second pancake. In case you need it spelled out, Here's the core truth I carried to the bank and home again. Sometimes the best closure is giving people exactly what they demanded and nothing more. Not your attention, not your explanations, not your future holidays or your medical decisions or your eventual grief. Just the number they kept chanting at you, translated into a language their bank app speaks and your heart doesn't. Then you get to decide what to do with the rest of your life. Mine, lately, is quiet in a way that feels like wealth. I don't owe anybody for the light I read by. When I turn it off at night, it's because I'm tired, not because someone is sighing in the kitchen about the bill. If you are some version of me reading this with your own jar in your head, you don't have to pay what they're asking. You can pay nothing. You can pay in distance. You can pay in therapy sessions and long walks and writing your own rules on index cards. If they insist on a ledger, you can settle it on your terms. Then you can go make pancakes at 10 p.m. because you feel like it and sit on your couch that doesn't smell like anyone else and eat them while they're hot. And that can be the whole story.